back to this week's episode. I am loving your guys' feedback. It is incredible. Keep those comments and questions coming. It is so good to hear your feedback, hear your questions, because it makes it so much easier for me to understand where everyone is coming from and how to best help you. And I am loving it. So thank you again. Okay, so for this week's episode, we're going to dive into closing the gaps, but the Q&A from the community. So let's talk about what people had questions about this week. The most popular question by far was, how do I figure out where to start if I'm so totally overwhelmed by the entire thing? I know I've got gaps, but I don't even know where to start. And I think what brings us back to start with the thing that you use the most. Because the thing that you're using the most might be something that if you made a simple tweak to, could stop your frustration. Like, is there something within your Gmail or your Google Calendar or your Calendly that you're like, if I could just figure out how to fix this, it would make my life so much easier? That's the place that I think is the most important to start. Now, if you're saying, well, I use multiple things and I've got multiple issues, what I would do is I would write a list out. And I think that's so important because when you're working through this process, it is easy to get overwhelmed and it's normal. So make sure that you're kind to yourself going through this process, because as you are going through and realizing, wow, maybe I have more gaps than I thought I did, that's totally okay, because we all do. And the only way to get through it is one step at a time. So if you've got multiple things that you're using every day, make sure that you write that list down. So when you think of it, you write it down and then jump back to what you're currently working on. That way it doesn't distract you or you don't have a squirrel moment. And if you're not someone who has ADD like me, then you probably are like, what the heck are you talking about, Jill? But believe me when I say it is so easy to get distracted during this process, and being able to refer back to that list so I stay on track is so important. Next most popular question, how do I even know if all the gaps are filled? And the truth is, they might never be. I know that's kind of disappointing and disheartening. You're like, seriously? But I've found that these systems that we use are constantly in flux. Things are being added by the manufacturers of the things that we use every single day. And so having this list, which I think is important, because then you can come back to it again a year from now, 6 months from now, whenever, and it'll be so much easier and so much faster to look through your list and be like, okay, evaluate. Okay, good to go. And then you can move on with everything else that you've got going on. So what's great about having that list is it's twofold. It'll help you get through it the first time, but second time, it'll help you come back and help you figure out, are there any gaps? Maybe, maybe not. But making sure that you're coming back to this, it's always in flux. I don't know if you guys remember from a previous podcast that I had where I talked about how knowing that your website is never going to be done. That was a huge conversation that I had with myself, because the first round I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's going to be like this forever. And then I talked with some experts. Turns out it needed a lot. So we went back to the drawing board, recreated it. We're in the middle of another rendition, another edit. And I think just like my website, just like your systems, they need to constantly be evaluated to make sure that they're still serving you. And if there's any extras that could be added, or maybe you weren't even aware of, that you could take advantage of, that part is huge. So just know that it might never be finished, but that's okay, because that's part of learning. That's part of using these systems, is constantly testing and tweaking them until you get a system that is huge help to you and makes your job so much easier. Another popular question was, should I tackle one gap at a time, or is it okay to tackle multiple gaps at a time? And I think this really comes down to what you're using. What system are you evaluating? Is it the example like Google Calendar and Calendly? Yeah, I totally think it's fine to do them at the same time because they work together. But also a cautionary tale. Again, make sure if you are someone that gets distracted easily, just know that you're that type of person, and maybe it makes more sense for you to tackle one at a time versus grouping a whole bunch together. Now, if you're on the flip side and you're somebody who doesn't get distracted very easily, that's awesome. Then you can tackle multiple at a time, but just make sure that you know the type of person that you are and what kind of systems that you're using. Is it one that you're super familiar with and you know inside and out? Or is it one that you're like, I bought this because it's super cool, I know I want to use it, but I don't really know how to use it? That's probably not the system that you want to tackle multiples at a time. It's just not going to end well probably. And it might lead to you getting more frustrated and just tabling this whole project again, which is what we don't want to have happen, because we really want to tackle this and get it off your plate, off your to-do list, so that way it'll just be part of your follow-up next year. Another question that I received was, besides YouTube, what other resources or apps can you recommend to help me with this process? One of my favorite apps that I love to use is the iPhone Notes app. What's awesome about it is it's so easy to quickly jot a note. You can even speak into Siri and she can write a note for you as well. There's so many things that you can do with this app, whether it's just a gobbledygook of stuff or maybe it's a bulleted list. Whatever the case may be, iPhone Notes is amazing. Another app that I use all the time is Rev.com. Now, the reason why Rev.com is awesome is sometimes I just need to speak something out loud and get it transcribed so I can help break a project down. So sometimes I'll just ramble into Rev.com for a while and then get the transcription of it. That way I can go back and reorganize everything inside of a Google Doc. Now, if you're somebody who has a lot of systems that you're trying to tackle and trying to figure out, Google Docs could be a huge help to you because the level of organization, copy-paste functions, things like that make it so easy. So using both of those together, I feel like can really help, especially if you're someone who works alone. If you're a solopreneur, sometimes it's hard because you can't bounce ideas off or brainstorm with someone because you're by yourself. But being able to do that with Rev.com and Google Docs, the combination of the two, has really made a huge help for me. So that way I've got everything kind of lined up. And then when I do get an opportunity to speak with someone, I have that bulleted list to go over. So those are a couple different options. I will say too, shameless plug, this is a huge section of my upcoming course. And if this is something that you feel like you struggle with, I would love to help you with it. So stay tuned in the coming weeks because I'm going to talk a lot more about it. And I'm so excited to share with you some of the top things that people have had issues on that I address in my course. Make sure that you tune in next week because we're going to be talking about operational procedures. Now, this is a big one. A lot of confusion around this. And for a lot of people, whether they're a small business or a solopreneur, don't have any operational systems. And this is one of the things that I love to geek out and talk about. So I'm so excited to share it with you. Make sure you come back next week so we can talk about it.